Well, welcome everyone to our first distinguished lecture of the fall semester. We're thrilled to have you here at the Scott Institute to welcome the Director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, Dr. Marianne Walck. I'm Costas Amaris. I'm the Director of the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation here at Carnegie Mellon, and we are the university's home for energy research. And we do a bunch of activities to help accelerate a clean energy innovation system and get us to the low carbon and zero carbon solutions that we need to transform our energy system. So we do that in a couple of different ways. We seed research funding here on campus. We're kind of like our little DARPA or ARPA-E here on campus, and we seed interesting ideas that drive energy innovation. We also grow new research initiatives. So we're helping partner with faculty and students and staff to grow research initiatives with federal and foundation and private sources. We also are the home for the clean energy ecosystem and clean tech startups. So Carnegie Mellon has an entrepreneurial spirit, and we're helping grow CMU founders from students, from faculty, staff, and from our community to drive innovation in clean tech. And then obviously we host many energy theme events like the one we're here at today. But I encourage you all to stay in touch with us as we think about all the other events that we have in this fall semester and as well as in the spring. So here's the best way to do that. We won't spam your inboxes, but if you want to sign up for our newsletters, you can scan the QR code and get in touch. Let us keep in touch with you so that you can come to not just free lunches, but good speakers and free lunches. So with that, I'd like to invite up our dean. Dean Bill Sanders is the dean of Carnegie Mellon School of Engineering, and he's going to offer his remarks and introduce our distinguished speaker. Dean Sanders is a professor of electrical and computer science, computer engineering, and of computer science, and is also in our Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy. Dean Sanders is a leader in engineering research and academia, a well-respected collaborator in higher education who builds public-private partnerships, and a very strong supporter of the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. So please welcome Dean Bill Sanders.
Thank you very much, Costa. And you didn't need to go through all that. You could just say, and it's Bill. But look, I really am happy to be here today. And I'm happy to be here not just as dean, but as someone who has done work in the power grid space and its IT infrastructure and cybersecurity for hard to believe, I think about 24 years now. So I guess that dates me a little bit. But it's great to see all of you. I'm particularly thrilled about this installment of Scott Energy Institute Distinguished Lecture Series because it really puts a spotlight on a collaboration that's been going on between NETL and CMU for a long time. This is something that's decades long, and I'll say a little bit more about that. It's produced many great collaboration and results so far, and we're looking at this as an opportunity to even deepen that relationship and do more. One of the earliest moments in these successes happened way back in 1983. That was a long time ago. I was a grad student in 1983. Maybe some of you weren't born. And that's when our really distinguished professor, Ed Rubin, led the development of the Integrated Environmental Control Model. And this was a powerful computational modeling tool that's still being used around the world 40 years later to analyze low carbon options for electric power generation. So the Scott Institute and CMU at large shares NETL's belief that energy breakthroughs are best achieved through interdisciplinary research and collaboration, combining the best of what engineering, architecture, computer science, and many other fields we have here at CMU have. And in fact, that's one of the hallmarks of CMU, that these boundaries are very low or don't exist, and places like the Scott Institute, whereas they're under the care of the College of Engineering, are really, truly cross-campus institutes that bring everything together. So this really common belief led to CMU's participation in the NETL Regional University Alliance, which was established in 2010. The alliance combined the brainpower and the expertise of CMU and 4 other local universities to accelerate the development of innovative solutions that reduce the carbon footprint. And that was a very important thing for us to partnership in. The co-director of Scott Energy Institute, Andy Gelman, proudly served as the Alliance's consortium director during its 5-year run. As a university, we're also proud of the well-established pipeline between CMU and NETL. I'm sure I'm missing some, but I've been told that doctoral recipients Dave Morgan, Joe Marriott, Harry Montri-Pragada are just a few of the many alumni that have gone on to have important roles in NETL as professionals. So I view this lecture as a new start and a new chapter in the CMU and NETL relationship. And I'm confident that our students, our faculty, and our alumni will form these connections going forward. So before the lecture officially begins, I want to tell you a bit, and before we welcome, I want to tell you a bit about our featured speaker, Dr. Marianne Walck, the new director of NETL. In this role, she fosters strategic relationships with academic institutions, state and local governments, and important people who are managing our carbon future. She also leads a NETL program with more than 1,700 employees that are responsible for more than 1,000 projects in 50 states with a total award value of about $5 billion. Prior to joining NETL, Dr. Walck served as the Deputy Laboratory Director for Science and Technology and the Chief Research Officer at Idaho National Laboratory, another very important laboratory, and actually one I've collaborated with quite a bit. Her prior experience includes 33 years at Sandia National Laboratories, concluding as the Vice President for its California laboratory and its Energy and Climate program. She earned a doctorate and a master's in geophysics from the California Institute of Technology and a bachelor's degree in geology and physics from Hope College. And I know that's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Holland, I'm sorry. Holland, Michigan, very close to where I grew up. Yes. She's a member of numerous societies and councils and a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Walck to the podium. Thank you. You're right, Holland, Michigan.
Holland, Michigan. I already managed to mess up the lapel mic. We'll see how this goes. So thank you for visiting today and coming to the lecture. I have been at NETL for about 7 months. So I'm brand new into the job, although I'm not brand new into this community of energy sciences. But I thought, let's see, where do we go? There we go. There's my title slide. So we're going to talk about the National Energy Technology Laboratory today. And we structured this in a way, I thought we would have some students here, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about my career path, because I believe that working at a national laboratory, a Department of Energy National Laboratory, is a very viable thing for young scientists and engineers to do for their career. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about NETL, which is, you can see our 3 sites here across the bottom. We'll talk a little bit about the partnerships that we've developed over the years and how we can continue with internships and careers, postdoctoral appointments, and career appointments at the laboratory. So, to start off, I'll just mention, we already talked about me going to Hope College in Holland, Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. So I'm a Michigan well, actually, I was born in Niagara Falls, New York, as was Brian Marianne, my coworker here from NETL. But we moved to Michigan very early in my history, and I don't really remember a lot about Western New York growing up. Went to college in Hope. I was always interested in science, didn't really know what kind of science to do. I got really hooked into earth science, geology. I just loved it, but it's very descriptive. Wanted to add something more quantitative to it, added physics to that. I decided to go into seismology as a graduate school opportunity. And one of the high points at Hope for me really was when one of my geology professors came to me and said, you know, asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I thought I'd probably get a master's degree and work for a while. This was back in the 70s, it was a long time ago. And he said, well, you know, you should get a PhD. And it never occurred to me, even though there were academics in my family, actually my uncle, I had an uncle who was a chemistry professor, but it just never occurred to me to get a PhD. And so that opened the whole thing for me. It's like, okay, all you need is one person to tell you what you can do, and then you can go on. And so I applied to Caltech, which I don't know how many of you know anything about Caltech. It's a pretty good school, and it's like a really good school in seismology, and they let me in. So I was like, okay, I'll go. And finished my education there, but while I was there, I realized academia probably wasn't for me. And if you're a graduate student, academia might be for you, and maybe it's not. And so if it's not, if that's not really what you want to do, I'd suggest that you consider a career in a DOE National Laboratory as an option. There are about 80,000 employees at DOE National Laboratories. There are 17 of them, and I'll talk about them in a minute. So I got a job at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I started there as a seismology researcher, and then continued on. I'll go into that a little bit more in the next slide. Ended up 31 years later out in California at Sandia, has a satellite laboratory in California where I was the leader of that site. And then we had a contract change. I won't go into it, but I ended up retiring. I was old enough to retire at the time, and I went back to Albuquerque. Went back and lived with my husband again. I had been living apart for a couple of years because I was in California and he was still in New Mexico. And then decided I didn't like being retired. So I started looking around for jobs, and it turned out Idaho National Laboratory needed a chief research officer, which is more of a strategy position. At California, I had a big line of people. I had 1,300 people. I had 66 buildings, 900 acres, a lot of things to take care of. At Idaho, I was focused on the research, the internal development, the strategy, some of our institutional investments, those types of things. So did that for about 5 years, and I was just about ready to retire from that, thinking, okay, maybe it's time to retire now, when this opportunity at the National Energy Technology Laboratory came up. And not only was I able to lead a laboratory in this position, which is new, but also I'd be able to return to some of my roots in earth science because NETL does a lot in the subsurface. We're about subsurface storage, fossil energy technologies over the years, but now even decarbonizing fossil energy for the future is one of our foci, as I'll talk about in a second. So that's sort of where I ended up, but it's all national laboratories all across the country, and I've had the pleasure of serving at 3 different ones. I just wanted to go through that because I think nobody wakes up when you're 10 years old and say, I want to be a national laboratory director, right? You don't know where you're going to go up. So be open to outcome and see where things take you. So this next slide shows where I went throughout my career, different things that I did. And most of it's at Sandia because it was a long career at Sandia. But the point here is that while I went up through management ranks fairly linearly, I also had to go sideways in technical area. Geophysics is not the world's biggest thing at Sandia. They do nuclear weapons for the most part, and they do energy technologies. But at a certain point, if I wanted to be above a first level manager position, I had to decide what I wanted to do. And was I going to take a job somewhere else? Well, I had a family. My husband worked at Sandia too. I had 2 kids. I wanted to stay there. It's big enough that I could move around within the laboratory, but do something else. So I went over into nuclear energy safety. Started working with a bunch of engineers, even though I'm a scientist. Sandia is an engineering lab, Idaho is an engineering lab, and NETL is an engineering lab. So I've had a lot of opportunities to work with engineers. So, and then things just kept getting broader and broader. So what I found out is while my capability of actually doing seismology right now is not very high, hopefully I know enough to be dangerous about many different energy technologies and hopefully can provide the type of leadership that a laboratory needs. So just to finish it up with me, I think it's also important when you're thinking about going through your career in terms of what you enjoy doing. If you can find something to do that you love, that's perfect. Make sure that you've got side activities to continue to enrich your life as you're going on. For me, the important things are music. I play the violin. I like to exercise, swimming, and hiking. But my family up there, I don't know if I have a pointer, but I've got my husband and my 2 sons. Very important for me. I think that we need to prioritize as we go through life what our values tell us we need to do. And my career trajectory was definitely different because when I was younger, I decided to prioritize my children and over advancement in my job. So I stayed being a first level manager for 13 years, which is a pretty long time. But my kids grew up, and then I was ready to move on into some different things. So just a few things for those of you who are students to think about as you're going through and figuring out what you're going to be doing throughout your life. To me, having a balanced life is really important. Taking some time off to re-energize is also extremely important. To me, also, one of the things that I'm passionate about is gender diversity in the sciences. So anytime you have 3 or 4 hours and you want to talk about gender diversity in the sciences, I'd be happy to do that as well. A lot of combinations, things that I think about that. Okay, so let's move on to more exciting technical things. At the Department of Energy, we're all about energy for the future. And this slide talks about the climate strategy for the nation. And of course, the energy and the climate strategy really have to be inextricably, they're hooked together, right? So what we're interested in is certainly decarbonizing our electrical system, but that's not enough. We have to decarbonize our industrial sector as well. And on top of that, we're going to have to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in order to get to a net zero economy. So my laboratory supports all of those goals through, because we work with the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management to do that. But let's take another step back and talk about the entire DOE laboratory system. So this is a chart that is often used for that. It depicts all 17 U.S. Department of Energy national laboratories in their types. So we have 10 of them are sponsored by the Office of Science, which is an $8 billion agent part of DOE that focuses on lower TRL level, more fundamental research and development. And those are on the left. Many of them are large enough that they do both fundamental science and applied science at the same time. So they are also involved in the applied energy game. On the top right, you see the multi-purpose security labs, Sandia, Los Alamos, and Livermore, which are really about our nation's nuclear deterrent, but they also do energy and cybersecurity and infrastructure and lots of other things. And those are the 3 largest laboratories in the system. We have the 3 applied energy laboratories, NREL, INL, and NETL, my lab. And we have 3 different sponsors within the Department of Energy. NETL is sponsored by and actually part of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. INL is sponsored by the Office of Nuclear Energy, their nuclear energy R&D lab, and NREL is the renewables. NREL is in Golden, Colorado, INL is in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and NETL is in 3 different places, as we'll talk about in a second. Then we have Savannah River National Laboratory, which is focused on environmental management, the legacy of the Cold War era, and they have quite a bit of security work there as well. So there's 17 national laboratories. They span a wide variety of technology readiness levels from very fundamental to very applied work. And we do all work together. We have many organizations that span all 17 labs We have a National Lab Directors Council. We meet periodically. We talk about issues that sort of span the entire world of the Department of Energy. But I'm going to focus in on our lab, NETL. So we're all about decarbonizing, right, as I mentioned earlier. So carbon management to help decarbonize industry and power generation is a big focus for our R&D. Sustainable natural gas to meet our energy needs. You know that we still use 80% fossil energy in this country. We can't just turn it off. We have to figure out how to decarbonize it as we're transitioning to a non-carbon-based energy system, which is going to take a long time. But in the clean energy and industrial economy, batteries, et cetera, they use critical minerals and materials that we need to get out of the ground. And we don't produce very many of those in the United States, as I'm sure many of you know. And we process almost none of them in the United States. So even the ones that we mine here, we ship overseas to be processed. So this is actually a national security problem. If we're going to be building a clean energy economy that's based on things like lithium, but also rare earths, terbium and neodymium and all those other cool elements in that row of the atomic of the chart, we're going to need ways to do that and protect that supply chain from how and make sure that we can have those materials when we need them, because if another nation could cut us off from those materials, then we would suffer greatly. So those are some of the things that we work on at my national laboratory. I think these are really cool. I think they're very important, and I hope you agree. Okay, so our mission at NETL is we want to drive innovation and deliver solutions. So that's part of being the applied technology laboratory. If you're an Office of Science laboratory, you're more about the information, the knowledge. That's cool. That's great stuff, especially when you're in graduate school. When you get out, you might want to apply it to something that makes a difference, and that's one of the things that we try to do here. And we're doing that by advancing carbon management and resource sustainability technologies. So, NETL is located here in Pittsburgh. We're down the South Hills, Brewston, to be specific. We're also down in Morgantown, West Virginia, home of West Virginia University. And we are also have a site in Albany, Oregon. Now, why would we have a site in Albany, Oregon, you might wonder. I wondered that myself when I got to NETL. It's a whole Bureau of Mines site. So many of the components of NETL come from Bureau of Mines sites. There's actually a coal mine at the NETL site today. It's not part of the lab, it's actually part of the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. Did I got that right? It's part of Center of Disease Controls. And they use it for mine safety experiments. But we're all related to many old mining and coal development and natural gas and oil development, now focused on carbon management for the future. This map also shows the 7 locations of the 17 national laboratories across the nation, ranging from Brookhaven over in Long Island and Princeton Plasma Physics in Princeton down to Oak Ridge in Tennessee, et cetera, and then several laboratories in California, including Lawrence Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore Slack, and one of Sandia's sites. NETL is unique among the 17 national laboratories. These other 16 are what they call GO-CO laboratories. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's actually fairly important. GO-CO means government-owned contractor operated. So each one of those labs are operated by something called a management and operation contract or an M&O contract. So the employees are not federal employees. They work for that contractor. So when I worked at INL, I was an employee of Battelle Energy Alliance, which is contracted to the US government. NETL is a federal laboratory, go, so government-owned, government-operated. So we have contractors, but many of us are federal employees, and so I'm an employee of the Department of Energy now. This enables us to do some things, and it makes a few other things a little bit tougher. We have 2 components to our laboratory because of that. The GO-CO laboratories do research and development. And that's all they do, and that's great. The GO-GO laboratory also does deployment of DOE programs. So we deploy, we mentioned the 1,000 projects in 50 states with all those billions of dollars. That's part of our program deployment activities. We are currently responsible for $30 billion worth of program deployment for the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a few years ago. And we have people feverishly working on that right now because it's an election year to try to get this money out the door into the hands of the people who successfully applied for it. So we have two major functions for our laboratory at NETL, but I'm going to focus primarily today on our R&D portfolio. Okay, here we are. We've got the 3 sites. We're in Pennsylvania. Here we are in Pennsylvania. We've got a direct air capture center here, where industrial partners can come in and bring their technologies and test them out in our laboratories. We also have some other activities like Center for Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning, et cetera. In West Virginia, that's the site of where our computing facilities, primary computing facilities are, and we have our REACT facility, reaction analysis, where we're using microwaves as catalysts to drive chemical reactions for decarbonization. And we have, over in Oregon, we do a lot of work with metallurgy and alloys at our Albany, Oregon site, as well as some of our geospatial data analysis as well. So those are some of the facilities we have at the different sites. We also have a field office down in Texas that helps us keep connected with the oil and gas industry. It's just a few people, but the primary 3 sites are West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Oregon. About 40% of our employees are in Pittsburgh, about 40% in Morgantown, about 20% out in Albany. That makes it a little bit more complicated to run the lab, I would say, when you have multiple sites. But it has other advantages. Here's our organization. This is more to just show you the people we have involved. Some of you may know Sean Plazinski. He was the acting director for many years. I'm sure he's had many interactions with CMU over the years. He's my principal deputy director. Brian Morreale is here in the front row. He's a director of our Research and Innovation Center, and that's where our R&D activities in the lab occur. And that's well over half of the people at the laboratory, probably 2/3 of them at least, work in our Research and Innovation Center or support the work that they do there. So that's the R&D part. Our program deployment part's over on the right-hand side of the slide. And those are people who work at getting the funding opportunity announcements distributed, evaluating them, awarding them, and getting the money, and then monitoring and managing the projects after they are awarded for fossil energy carbon management and several other offices in the Department of Energy. And of course, we have operations. Very important. Okay, so we have more than 1,900 employees. I think the bio they gave you was it was out of date. What can we say? We're growing a little bit. All the national laboratories have been growing for the last 10 years or so, and we're up to about 1,900. That makes us one of the smaller laboratories, I would say, but it's a good size. It's big enough to have impact and not so big that you do everything. And that's one of the things I like about NETL is that we're more focused on carbon management and sustainable resource development. We don't do everything. When I was at Sandia, I couldn't name a scientific or technical area that we weren't involved in. It was beautifully broad, but difficult to keep your arms around. So of course we have scientists, engineers, et cetera. We also have a lot of technical program managers and procurement experts and attorneys for our program deployment function. So we have to do like the NEPA analysis, National Environmental Protection Act, for all of these programs that go out the door has to be done at NETL. So we have quite a few people in those offices. Despite the fact that we're a go-go, we're 65% contractor. You know, when I first learned that, it's like, how does this work? Well, I'm still asking that question, but this is, we have both. You can work at NETL as a federal employee, or you can work at NETL as a contractor who's working with our federal employees. So there are many different mechanisms. Okay, so what do we do? Well, our program deployment people are big into this program execution and integration competency. And that's very, very important. From an R&D perspective, we are focused in about 5 different areas. So geological and environmental systems, as an earth scientist, this is a part that I naturally gravitate to. Every time we go into one of those labs, I get a big smile on my face, and then we're talking about rocks and flow through the subsurface, and this is all fun stuff. Why do we need to worry about that? Well, if you're going to store carbon in the subsurface, you got to know what the supercritical carbon dioxide is going to do when it gets down there, right? Or say you're going to try to store hydrogen in the subsurface, which is tough because hydrogen is a very small molecule. It likes to escape. How are we going to deal with those subsurface systems? We also work a lot in materials and engineering and manufacturing. Materials, of course, I think that's a competency that's spread across the entire national laboratory system. We're focused on materials that are useful for energy systems, so things that will work well in high temperatures, high corrosive environments, high pressure environments. And which materials should we use? How would we design new materials? That type of thing. We work in energy conversion engineering. A lot of chemical engineers work at NETL, turning fuels into electricity, while you're capturing carbon, developing new fuels, all sorts of how do we use that carbon dioxide molecule, all those types of things and much more in energy conversion engineering. Computational science and engineering, of course, is a big thing at Carnegie Mellon. It's very important for us, and it supports all of our areas in terms of R&D. We do quite a bit with computational fluid dynamics. We have a particular software package that we have developed and maintain called MFIX. We also work in artificial intelligence and other areas that support all of our activities. Finally, our strategic systems analysis and engineering organization and competency is all about things like life cycle analyses and techno-economic modeling for energy systems. So if you're going to get an energy system out and working, what are the costs and benefits? What's it going to take to do that from an economic perspective? We do quite a bit of that, and we're the primary source for our fossil energy and carbon management peers over there in the Department of Energy in terms of developing products in that realm. Here's the FEMCM. So FECM stands for Fossil Energy Carbon Management. Here's the FECM program space. This is what this part of the Department of Energy does. They do carbon management, and then they have another program called resource sustainability. It used to be called oil and gas. Now it's called resource sustainability. So the idea is, how do you develop fossil resources in a sustainable manner? So you see things like mineral sustainability. That's where our critical minerals work is. Methane mitigation. Everybody knows methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. Doesn't have the same lifetime as carbon dioxide, but while it's in the atmosphere, it's pretty bad stuff. So how do we even find where it's being emitted from? We have a big program in finding orphan wells. There are thousands of orphan wells just in Pennsylvania alone. Back in the 1800s, when we first started producing oil and gas, nobody paid much attention. When the well was done, they just left, right? So how do we even find those? Do we know whether natural gas is methane, which is largely, comprised of methane? Is it emitting methane? Can we cap it? How can we get rid of those types of pollutants in our atmosphere? So those types of things over in resource sustainability. We also work in produced waters, R&D, gas hydrates, and carbon storage and carbon development. Natural carbon's a big thing right now. Just people have recently discovered some deposits, subsurface deposits of hydrogen gas. So can we use those instead of trying to make hydrogen through electrolysis or steam methane reforming? Those types of things. Over here in carbon management, we have point source carbon capture, trying to grab carbon dioxide out of flue gas streams. We have carbon dioxide removal, where we're trying to take it out of the air or put it into minerals, or have algae take care of our carbon dioxide for us. Carbon dioxide conversion, how can we convert it into something that we can use? Once we get it out of the air, what do we do with it? Well, we have to take it somewhere, and then we have to store it, most likely in the subsurface. And of course, there's the whole area of developing clean sources of hydrogen for an upcoming hydrogen economy. So these are the areas that fossil energy carbon management is interested in. That's what they fund, and that's what our laboratory mainly works on. We have some new and exciting facilities that we're working on. We're building a new computational science and engineering center down in Morgantown. We are building a new advanced alloy signature center in Albany, Oregon. And yes, this is a forge where they've got molten metal and they use forklifts and they pull these things out of furnaces. And it's very exciting to visit if you're not a metallurgist, I guess, because I don't usually get to see such things. I was in a lab out there when it was about 105 degrees out last summer, and the lab's not air conditioning, and they were pulling this molten metal out of the furnace. It was hot. So really hot stuff they do here in Albany. And then, of course, the direct air capture center in Pittsburgh. These are all investments that we're making with money from the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed quite recently and allowed us to invest in our facilities. So what sort of R&D do we do? We talked about the competencies, but here's just a couple of examples. So we're extracting rare earth elements from unconventional resources, so things like coal ash deposits. We might look at acid mine drainage. How can we get those, or maybe even the edges of coal seams themselves? How can we get those materials out of materials that have already been extracted from the ground? Developing new mines is really difficult. It takes a long time. A lot of people are very concerned, and rightly so, about the environmental impacts of mining. So if we can get these rare earth elements that we need for the clean energy, batteries, and economy, if we can get them from materials that are already out of the ground, so much the better. So we're working on that. We've been developing alloys. So here's a high-entropy, I think this was, I can't remember all the elements that are in this particular nickel alloy, but you can see that it increased the strength of it by 256%. I always wonder how they can be quite so precise on that. But the idea here is that we need to use these things at very high temperatures, and there's metals start to creep at these high temperatures. And they developed a low creep nickel alloy at our laboratory in Albany recently that has got a new patent, and it will be able to be deployed. We're working on some cool wafer scale engine technology with a company called Cerebras for very low volume, low energy producing sort of mega scale chips types of architecture for, and I'm probably way out of my depth here, and you guys are probably all computer people, so you can laugh at me. But what we're trying to do here is this was developed for artificial intelligence applications, and we've written some application program to help use that architecture, which is not very energy intensive compared to many other architectures, so we can use them on regular high performance computing problems. We've developed some microwave technology to be able to create ammonia with 25% less cost and also no carbon emissions at low temperature and pressure. And another final example is developing a cost model for building hydrogen pipelines. If we're going to have a hydrogen economy, we need to be able to transport that hydrogen. So how much is that going to cost? How can we put hydrogen into pipelines that were created for other uses, and how much what are the sort of economic tipping points for building these hydrogen pipelines? So that's an example of some of the integrated modeling that we do. And we do many, many techno-economic analyses of carbon management technologies. So that's sort of a sampling of the types of R&D that my lab does. Okay, I want to talk about this one for just a minute because it's gotten a little bit of publicity here. You may have recently heard about a study that we did at NETL that documented that we could produce a lot of lithium from produced waters from the Marcellus Shale. This got a fair amount of press here in Pittsburgh and elsewhere. So I said, okay, great. But that didn't, how did we do this? Well, we had to get a lot of data from the Pennsylvania environmental people that talk about the makeup of the produced water, so that we could figure out how much lithium is. Well, why were we doing that to begin with? Well, it turns out there's a backstory. What we started doing back in 2018 was we noticed there was a whole bunch of precipitates on the inside of production tubing for natural gas production from the Marcellus. So things were glomming up the production pipes, basically. So we started doing some R&D, some geochemistry R&D to try to figure out what was happening with that. And in order to do that work, we ended up needing to get a whole bunch of data from the Pennsylvania Environmental Department to do that. But this work involved replicating the field conditions within that production tubing and investigating how this barite scale was forming. And so we were able to document and understand how this scale was degrading the interior of these pipes, which would, of course, help us understand how to avoid that in the future. And that led to a study that focused on evaluating these reports of water quality that were sent to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and then they digitized that data set. And so then with that, they were able to figure out, wow, we've got a lot of lithium in this produced water because we had all the data for it. And so what this found was that we looked at two parts of the Marcellus, which is shown in the hatch there on the right in the map of Pennsylvania. Northeast part and the southwest part of the state. Of course, we're closer to the southwest part. And it turns out that, as in many ways of earth science, things vary from place to place. They're not the same. Even though it's the same formation, they don't have the same amounts of lithium. Turns out there's higher amounts of lithium in the northeast, wells from the northeast part of the state, but there's not as much produced water. There's lower amounts of lithium in the southwest with a smaller range of variation and a lot more water. And it turns out that if you would actually probably get more lithium from more bang for the buck in the southwestern part of the state. But the upshot was that something on the order of 40% of our domestic lithium needs this year could be covered by the amount that is theoretically in the produced water from these Marcellus shale wells. So that's actually quite a bit. This doesn't take into account your efficiency of extracting the lithium. It doesn't actually, it's just this is a potential resource type of a study, but it does show that some of these unconventional resources that we're all, right now, what do we do with this produced water? You guys know what we do with it? We inject it, right? Well, if instead we could process it before it's injected and extract lithium in an environmentally responsible way, right? And pretty high efficiency, if we could do that, we could actually gain a lot of what we need for battery technology. So that's sort of the end of that part of the talk. Let's move on to partnerships. We have had a lot of past collaborations with Carnegie Mellon University, and with also some of our other university partners have included places like University of Pittsburgh and West Virginia University, Penn State, Virginia Tech, and many others. Most of those have officially come to an end. When I arrived at NETL back in February, we didn't have any specific university agreements. So one of the reasons that we're visiting and going out to universities is try to develop additional ones and new ones, and looking for agreements, potentially joint appointments, joint faculty programs, develop joint research opportunities, and to bring in students and postdocs into our laboratory and to do research collaboratively with the universities in an exchange way. We also have a number of fellowship and internship programs at NETL. You can see most of these. My next slide does, which I'll end with, shows some of the websites that you can go to if you're interested in this. We have our own internship and fellowship programs, which are run by the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education. We're working with the GEM program for underrepresented minorities. We also have an interesting program called Pathways, which actually provides a pathway directly into government service jobs. So I mentioned we have a lot of contractors. Many times we'll have postdoctoral appointees might not be able to get a federal job right away because we're limited in the number that we have at the laboratory. They could go become a contractor and later perhaps become a federal employee if that's of interest. These pathway programs provide a more direct route into becoming a federal employee. And then, of course, externally funded programs. So we're working on all these things. We're looking for input from the universities on how to best do this, and we're very much interested in working with Carnegie Mellon on increasing the number of students and postdocs we have and increasing the amount of collaborative research that we do with the university. This last slide shows some of the websites. Our website is netl.doe.gov. It's another difference between a go-go and a go-co. The other national labs don't have the DOE in the middle. If you go to Idaho National Lab, it's just inl.gov, but here we got the DOE, so don't forget the DOE. I'm always getting emails from people who said, I didn't get your email address right the first time, so I'm trying this, and then it gets to me. So just thought I'd point that out. We have a website about education and internships. This Zintellect thing is, I believe, a part of the ORISE website where you can understand how to register to become an intern or a postdoc and look at this. The Federal Pathway Program, we have to go through USA Jobs, which I don't find to be particularly user-friendly. But we'd be happy to help you if you need help doing that. And of course, there's an email address as well. So if you're interested in working with us in the future, we'd be very happy to talk with you about that. And I believe that is it. So thank you very much for your attention.